Chapter 1 of The Ivory Child. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Ivory Child by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 1. Allen gives a shooting lesson. Now I, Allen Quatermain, come to the story of what was, perhaps, one of the strangest of all the adventures which have befallen me in the course of a life that so far can scarcely be called tame or humdrum. Amongst many other things it tells of the war against the Black Kendah people and the dead of Jana, their elephant god. Often since then I have wondered if this creature was or was not anything more than a mere gigantic beast of the forest. It seems improbable, even impossible, but the reader of future days may judge of this matter for himself. Also he can form his opinion as to the religion of the White Kendah and their pretensions to a certain degree of magical skill. Of this magic I will make only one remark. If it existed at all, it was by no means infallible. To take a single instant, Harût and Marût were convinced by divination that I, and I only, could kill Jana, which was why they invited me to Kendahland. Yet in the end it was Hans who killed him. Jana nearly killed me. Now to my tale. In another history called The Holy Flower, I have told how I came to England with a young gentleman of the name of Scroope, partly to see him safely home after a hunting accident, and partly to try to dispose of a unique orchid for a friend of mine called Brother John by the white people and Dogeetah by the natives, who was popularly supposed to be mad, but in fact was very sane indeed. So sane was he that he pursued what seemed to be an absolutely desperate quest for over 20 years, until, with some humble assistance on my part, he brought it to a curiously successful issue. But all this tale is told in The Holy Flower, and I only allude to it here. That is at present to explain how I came to be in England. While in this country I stayed for a few days with Scroope, or rather with his fiancée and her people, at a fine house in Essex. I called it Essex to avoid the place being identified, but really it was one of the neighbouring counties. During my visit I was taken to see a much finer place, a splendid old castle with brick gateway towers, that had been wonderfully well restored and turned into a most luxurious modern dwelling. Let us call it Ragnall, the seat of a baron of that name. I had heard a good deal about Lord Ragnall, who, according to all accounts, seemed a kind of admirable Crichton. He was said to be wonderfully handsome, a great scholar, he had taken a double first at college, a great athlete, he had been captain of the Oxford boat at the University race, a very promising speaker who had already made his mark in the House of Lords, a sportsman who had shot tigers and other large game in India, a poet who had published a successful volume of verse under a pseudonym, a good soldier until he left the service, and lastly a man of enormous wealth, owning, in addition to his estates, several coal mines and an entire town in the north of England. "Dear me," I said when the list was finished, "he seems to have been born with a whole case of gold spoons in his mouth. I hope one of them will not choke him," adding, "perhaps he will be unlucky in love." "That is just where he is most lucky of all," answered the young lady to whom I was speaking. It was Scroope's fiancée, Miss Manners. "For he is engaged to a lady that, I am told, is the loveliest, sweetest, cleverest girl in all England, and they absolutely adore each other." "Dear me," I repeated, "I wonder what fate has got up its sleeve for Lord Ragnall and his perfect lady love. I was doomed to find out one day." So it came about that when on the following morning I was asked if I would like to see the wonders of Ragnall Castle, I answered yes. Really, however, I wanted to have a look at Lord Ragnall himself, if possible, for the account of his many perfections had impressed the imagination of a poor colonist like myself, who had never found an opportunity of setting his eyes upon a kind of human angel. Human devils I had met in plenty, but never a single angel, at least of the male sex. Also there was always the possibility that I might get a glimpse of the still more angelic lady to whom he was engaged, whose name, I understood, was the Honourable Miss Holmes. So I said that nothing would please me more than to see this castle. Thither we drove accordingly through the fine, frosty air, for the month was December. On reaching the castle, Mr. Scroope was told that Lord Ragnall, whom he knew well, was out shooting somewhere in the park, but that, of course, he could show his friend over the place. So we went in, the three of us, for Miss Manners, to whom Scroope was to be married very shortly, had driven us over in her pony carriage. The porter at the gateway towers took us to the main door of the castle and handed us over to another man, whom he addressed as Mr. Savage, whispering to me that he was his lordship's personal attendant. I remember the name because it seemed to me that I had never seen anyone who looked much less savage. In truth, his appearance was that of a duke in disguise, as I imagine dukes to be, for I never set eyes on one. His dress, he wore a black morning cut-away coat, was faultless. His manners were exquisite, polite to the verge of irony, but with a hint of haughty pride in the background. He was handsome also, with a fine nose and a hawk-like eye, with a touch of baldness added to the general effect. His age may have been anything between 35 and 40, and the way he deprived me of my hat and stick, to which I strove to cling, showed, I thought, resolution of character. Probably, I reflected to myself, he considers me an unusual sort of person who might damage the pictures and other objects of art with the stick, and not seeing his way how to ask me to give it up without suggesting suspicion, was hit upon the expedient of taking my hat also. In after days Mr. Samuel Savage informed me that I was quite right in this surmise. He said he thought that, judging from my somewhat unconventional appearance, I might be one of the dangerous class of whom he had been reading in the papers, namely a anarchist. I write the word as he pronounced it, for here comes the curious thing. This man, so flawless, so well instructed in some respects, had a fault which gave everything away. His H's were uncertain. 3 of them would come quite right, but the fourth, let us say, would be conspicuous either by its utter absence or by its unwonted appearance. He could speak, when describing the Ragnall pictures, in rotund and flowing periods that would scarcely have disgraced the pen of Gibbon. Then suddenly that H would appear or disappear, and the illusion was over. It was like a sudden shock of cold water down the back. I never discovered the origin of his family. It was a matter of which he did not speak, perhaps because he was vague about it himself. But if an Earl of Norman blood had married a handsome Cockney kitchen maid of native ability, I can quite imagine that Samuel Savage might have been a child of the union. For the rest, he was a good man and a faithful one, for whom I have high respect. On this occasion he conducted us round the castle, or rather its more public rooms, showing us many treasures and, I should think, at least 200 pictures of eminent and departed artists, which gave him the opportunity of exhibiting a peculiar if somewhat erratic knowledge of history. To tell the truth, I began to wish that it were a little less full of detail, since on a December day those large apartments felt uncommonly cold. Scroope and Miss Manners seemed to keep warm, perhaps with the inward fires of mutual admiration. But as I had no one to admire except Mr. Savage, a temperature of about 35 degrees produced its natural effect upon me. At length we took a short cut from the large to the little gallery through a warmed and comfortable room, which I understood was Lord Ragnall's study. Halting for a moment by one of the fires, I observed the picture on the wall, over which a curtain was drawn, and asked Mr. Savage what it might be. "That, sir," he replied with a kind of haughty reserve, "is the portrait of her future ladyship, which his lordship keeps for his private eye." Miss Manners sniggered, and I said, "Oh, thank you. What an ill-omened kind of thing to do." Then, observing through an open door the hall in which my hat had been taken from me, I lingered, and as the others vanished in the little gallery, slipped into it, recovered my belongings and passed out to the garden, purposing to walk there till I was warm again and Scroope reappeared. While I marched up and down a terrace, on which I remember several very cold-looking peacocks were seated, like conscientious birds that knew it was their duty to be ornamental, however low the temperature, I heard some shots fired, apparently in a clump of ilex oaks which grew about 500 yards away, and reflected to myself that they seemed to be those of a small rifle, not of a shotgun. My curiosity being excited as to what it was to be an almost professional matter, I walked towards the grove, making a circuit through the shrubbery. At length I found myself near to the edge of a glade and perceived, standing behind the shelter of a magnificent ilex, 2 men. One of these was a young keeper, and the other from his appearance I felt sure must be Lord Ragnall himself. Certainly he was a splendid-looking man, very tall, very broad, very handsome, with a peaked beard, a kind and charming face and large dark eyes. He wore a cloak upon his shoulders which was thrown back from over a velvet coat, and except for the light double-barrelled rifle in his hand, looked exactly like a picture by Van Dyck, which Mr. Savage had just informed me was one of his lordship's ancestors at the time of Charles I. Standing behind another oak, I observed that he was trying to shoot wood pigeons as they descended to feed upon the acorns, from which the hard weather had made them greedy. From time to time those beautiful blue birds appeared and hovered a moment before they settled, whereupon the sportsman fired and they flew away. Bang, bang went the double-barrelled rifle, and off fled the pigeon. "Damn," said the sportsman in a pleasant, laughing voice. "That's the 12th I have missed, Charles." "You hit his tail, my lord. I saw a feather come out. But, my lord, as I told you, there ain't no man living what can kill pigeons on the wing with a bullet, even when they seem to sit still in the air." "I have heard of one, Charles. Mr. Scroope has a friend from Africa staying with him, who, he swears, could knock over 4 out of 6. "Then, my lord, Mr. Scroope has a friend what lies," replied Charles as he handed him the second rifle. This was too much for me. I stepped forward, raising my hat politely, and said: "Sir, forgive me for interrupting you, but you are not shooting at those wood pigeons in the right way. Although they seem to hover just before they settle, they are dropping much faster than you think. Your keeper was mistaken when he said that you knocked a feather out of the tail of that last bird at which you fired 2 barrels. In both cases you shot at least a foot above it, and what fell was a leaf from the ilex tree." There was a moment's silence, which was broken by Charles, who ejaculated in a thick voice: "Well, of all the cheek!" Lord Ragnall, however, for it was he, looked first angry and then amused. "Sir," he said, "I thank you for your advice, which no doubt is excellent, for it is certainly true that I have missed every pigeon which I tried to shoot with these confounded little rifles. But if you could demonstrate in practice what you so kindly set out in precept, the value of your counsel would be enhanced." Thus he spoke, mimicking, I have no doubt, for he had a sense of humour, the manner of my address, which nervousness had made somewhat pompous. "Give me the rifle," I answered, taking off my greatcoat. He handed it me with a bow. "Mind what you are about," growled Charles. "That there thing is full cocked and air triggered." I withered, or rather tried to wither him with a glance, but this unbelieving keeper only stared back at me with insolence in his round and bird-like eyes. Never before had I felt quite so angry with a menial. Then a horrible doubt struck me. Supposing I should miss? I knew very little of the manner of flight of English wood pigeons, which are not difficult to miss with a bullet, and nothing at all of these particular rifles, though a glance at them showed me that they were exquisite weapons of their sort and by a great maker. If I muffed the thing now, how should I bear the scorn of Charles and the polite amusement of his noble master? Almost I prayed that no more pigeons would put in an appearance, and thus that the issue of my supposed skill might be left in doubt. But this was not to be. These birds came from far in ones or twos to search for their favourite food, and the fact that others had been scared away did not cause them to cease from coming. Presently I heard Charles mutter: "Now then, look out, governor. Here's your chance of teaching his lordship how to do it, though he does happen to be the best shot in these counties." While he spoke 2 pigeons appeared, one a little behind the other, coming down very straight. As they reached the opening in the ilex grove they hovered, preparing to alight. For of us they could see nothing, one at a distance of about 50 and the other of say 70 yards away. I took the nearest, got on to it, allowing for the drop and the angle, and touched the trigger of the rifle, which fell to my shoulder very sweetly. The bullet struck that pigeon on the crop, out of which fell a shower of acorns that it had been eating. As it sank to the ground, stone dead. Number 2 pigeon, realizing danger, began to mount upwards almost straight. I fired the second barrel and by good luck shot its head off. Then I snatched the other rifle which Charles had been loading automatically from his outstretched hand, for at that moment I saw 2 more pigeons coming. At the first I risked a difficult shot and hit it far back, knocking out its tail but bringing it, still fluttering, to the ground. The other two I covered, but when I touched the trigger there was a click. No more. This was my opportunity of coming even with Charles, and I availed myself of it. "Young man," I said, while he gaped at me open-mouthed, "you should learn to be careful with rifles, which are dangerous weapons. If you give one to a shooter that is not loaded, it shows that you are capable of anything." Then I turned and, addressing Lord Ragnall, added, "I must apologize for that third shot of mine, which was infamous, for I committed a similar fault to that against which I warned you, sir, and did not fire far enough ahead. However, it may serve to show your attendant the difference between the tail of a pigeon and an oak leaf," and I pointed to one of the feathers of the poor bird which was still drifting to the ground. "Well, if this 'ere snipe of a chap ain't the devil in boots," exclaimed Charles to himself. But his master cut him short with a look and lifted his hat to me and said, "Sir, the practice much surpasses the precept, which is unusual. I congratulate you upon a skill that almost partakes of the marvellous, unless indeed chance—" and he stopped. "It is natural that you should think so," I replied, "but if more pigeons come and Mr. Charles will make sure that he loads the rifle, I hope to undeceive you." At this moment, however, a loud shout from Scroope, who was looking for me, reinforced by a shrill cry uttered by Miss Manners, banished every pigeon within half a mile, a fact of which I was not sorry, since who knows whether I should have it all or any of the next three birds. "I think my friends are calling me, so I will bid you good morning," I said awkwardly. "One moment, sir," he exclaimed. "Might I first ask your name? Mine is Ragnall, Lord Ragnall." "And mine is Allan Quatermain," I said. "Oh," he answered, "that explains matters. Charles, this is Mr. Scroope's friend, the gentleman that you said exaggerated. I think you had better apologize." But Charles was gone, to pick up the pigeons, I suppose. At this moment Scroope and the young lady appeared, having heard our voices, and a general explanation ensued. "Mr. Quatermain has been giving me a lesson in shooting pigeons on the wing with a small bore rifle," said Lord Ragnall, pointing to the dead birds that still lay upon the ground. "He is competent to do that," said Scroope. "Painfully competent," replied his lordship. "If you don't believe me, ask the under keeper." "It is the only thing I can do," I explained modestly. "Rifle shooting is my trade, and I have made it a habit of practising at birds on the wing with ball. I have no doubt that with a shotgun your lordship would leave me nowhere, for that is a game at which I have had little practice, except when shooting for the pot in Africa." "Yes," interrupted Scroope, "you wouldn't have any chance at that, Allan, against one of the finest shots in England." "I am not so sure," said Lord Ragnall, laughing pleasantly. "I have an idea that Mr. Quatermain is full of surprises. However, with his leave, we'll see. If you have a day to spare, Mr. Quatermain, we are going to shoot through the home coverts to-morrow, which haven't been touched till now, and I hope you will join us." "It is most kind of you, but that is impossible," I answered with firmness. "I have no gun here." "Oh, never mind that, Mr. Quatermain. I have a pair of breech loaders" (these were new things at that date) "which have been sent down to me to try. I am going to return them because they are much too short in the stock for me. I think they would just suit you, and you are quite welcome to the use of them." Again I excused myself, guessing that the discomfited Charles would put all sorts of stories about concerning me, and not wishing to look foolish before a party of grand strangers, no doubt chosen for their skill at this particular form of sport. "Well, Allan," exclaimed Scroope, who always had a talent for saying the wrong thing, "you are quite right not to go into a competition with Lord Ragnall over high pheasants." I flushed, for there was some truth in his blundering remark, whereon Lord Ragnall said with ready tact, "I asked Mr. Quatermain to shoot, not to a shooting match, Scroope, and I hope he'll come." This left me no option, and with a sinking heart I had to accept. "Sorry I can't ask you too, Scroope," said his lordship, when the details had been arranged, "but we can only manage 7 guns at this shoot. But will you and Miss Manners come to dine and sleep tomorrow evening? I should like to introduce your future wife to my future wife," he added, colouring a little. Miss Manners, being devoured with curiosity as to the wonderful Miss Holmes, of whom she had heard so much but never actually seen, accepted at once, before her lover could get out a word, whereupon Scroope volunteered to bring me over in the morning and load for me. Being possessed by a terror that I should be handed over to the care of the unsympathetic Charles, I replied that I should be very grateful, and so the thing was settled. On our way home we passed through a country town of which I forget the name, and the sight of a gunsmith's shop there reminded me that I had no cartridges. So I stopped to order some, as fortunately Lord Ragnall had mentioned that the guns he was going to lend me were 12 bores. The tradesman asked me how many cartridges I wanted, and when I replied 100, stared at me and said, "If, as I understood you, sir, you are going to the big winter shoot at Ragnall tomorrow, you had better make it 350 at least. I shall be there to watch, like lots of others, and I expect to see nearly 200 fired by each gun to the last lake stand." "Very well," I answered, fearing to show more ignorance by further discussion. "I will call for the cartridges on my way tomorrow morning. Please load them with 3 drachms of powder." "Yes, sir, and an ounce and an eighth of No. 5 shot, sir? That's what all the gentlemen use." "No," I answered, "No. 3. Please be sure as to that. Good evening." The gunsmith stared at me, and as I left the shop I heard him remark to his assistant, "That African gent must think he's going out to shoot ostriches with buckshot. I expect he ain't no good, whatever they may say about him." End of chapter 1.
Chapter 1 of The Ghost, a Modern Fantasy. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Simon Evers. The Ghost, a Modern Fantasy by Arnold Bennett. Chapter 1. My Splendid Cousin. I am 8 years older now. It had never occurred to me that I am advancing in life and experience until, in setting myself to recall the various details of the affair, I suddenly remembered my timid confusion before the haughty mien of the clerk at Keith Pryse's. I had asked him, "Have you any amphitheatre seats for the opera tonight?" He did not reply. He merely put his lips together and waved his hand slowly from side to side. Not perceiving, in my simplicity, that he was thus expressing a sublime pity for the ignorance which my demand implied, I innocently proceeded, "No balcony?" This time he condescended to speak. "Nothing, sir." Then I understood that what he meant was, "Poor fool, why don't you ask for the moon?" I blushed. Yes, I blushed before the clerk at Keith Pryse's, and turned to leave the shop. I suppose he thought that as a Christian it was his duty to enlighten my pitiable darkness. "It's the first Rosa night tonight," he said with august affability. "I had a couple of stalls this morning, but I've just sold them over the telephone for £6.10. He smiled. His smile crushed me. I know better now. I know that clerks in box offices, with their correct neckties and their air of continually doing wonders over the telephone, are not, after all, the grand masters of the operatic world. I know that that manner of theirs is merely a part of their attire, like their cravats, that they are not really responsible for the popularity of great sopranos, and that they probably go home at night to Fulham by the white omnibus, or to Hammersmith by the red one, and not in broughams. "I see," I observed, carrying my crushed remains out into the street. Impossible to conceal the fact that I had recently arrived from Edinburgh as raw as a ploughboy. If you had seen me standing irresolute on the pavement, tapping my stick of Irish bog oak idly against the curbstone, you would have seen a slim youth, rather nattily dressed, I think, with a shadow of brown on his upper lip, and a curl escaping from under his hat, and the hat just a little towards the back of his head, and a pretty good chin and the pride of life in his ingenuous eye. Quite unaware that he was immature, quite unaware that the supple curves of his limbs had an almost feminine grace that made older fellows feel paternal, quite unaware that he had everything to learn and that all his troubles lay before him, actually fancying himself a man because he had just taken his medical degree. The June sun shone gently radiant in a blue sky, and above the roofs milky-bosomed clouds were floating in a light wind. The town was bright, fresh, alert, as London can be during the season, and the joyousness of the busy streets echoed the joyousness of my heart, for I had already, with the elasticity of my years, recovered from the reverse inflicted on me by Keith Price's clerk. On the opposite side of the street were the rich premises of a well-known theatrical club, whose weekly entertainments had recently acquired fame. I was, I recollect, proud of knowing the identity of the building. It was one of the few things I did know in London, and I was observing with interest the wondrous livery of the two menials motionless behind the glass of its portals, when a tandem equipage drew up in front of the pile, and the menials darted out in their white gloves to prove that they were alive and to justify their existence. It was an amazingly complete turnout, and it well deserved all the attention it attracted, which was considerable. The horses were capricious, highly polished greys, perhaps a trifle undersized, but with such an action as is not to be bought for less than 25 guineas a hoof. The harness was silver-mounted, the dog-cart itself a creation of beauty and nice poise, the groom a pink and priceless perfection. But the crown and summit of the work was the driver, a youngish gentleman who, from the gloss of his peculiarly shaped collar to the buttons of his diminutive boots, exuded an atmosphere of expense. His gloves, his scarf-pin, his watch-chain, his moustache, his eyeglass, the crease in his nether garments, the cut of his coat-tails, the curves of his hat, all uttered with one accord the final word of fashion, left nothing else to be said. The correctness of Keith Price's clerk was as naught to his correctness. He looked as if he had emerged immaculate from the outfitter's boudoir, an achievement the pride of Bond Street. As this marvellous creature stood up and prepared to alight from the vehicle, he chanced to turn his eyeglass in my direction. He scanned me carelessly, glanced away, and scanned me again with a less detached stare. And I, on my part, felt the awakening of a memory. "That's my cousin Sullivan," I said to myself. "I wonder if he wants to be friends." Our eyes coquetted. I put one foot into the roadway, withdrew it, restored it to the roadway, and then crossed the street. It was indeed the celebrated Sullivan Smith, composer of those so successful musical comedies, The Japanese Cat, The Arabian Girl, and My Queen. And he condescended to recognize me. His gestures indicated, in fact, a warm desire to be cousinly. I reached him. The moment was historic. While the groom held the wheeler's head and the twin menials assisted with dignified inactivity, we shook hands. "How long is it?" he said. 15 years about," I answered, feeling deliciously old. "Remember I punched your head?" "Rather." Somehow I was proud that he had punched my head. "No credit to me," he added magnanimously, "seeing I was years older than you and a foot or so taller. By the way, Carl, how old did you say you were?" He regarded me as a sixth-form boy might regard a fourth-form boy. "I didn't say I was any age," I replied, "but I'm 23. "Well, then, you're quite old enough to have a drink. Come into the club and partake of a gin and angostura, old man. I'll clear all this away." He pointed to the equipage, the horses, and the groom, and with an apparently magic word whispered into the groom's ear, he did in fact clear them away. They rattled and jingled off in the direction of Leicester Square, while Sullivan muttered observations on the groom's driving. "Don't imagine I make a practice of tooling tandems down at my club," said Sullivan. "I don't. I brought the thing along today because I've sold it complete to Lottie Cass. You know her, of course." "I don't." "Well, anyway," he went on after this check, "I've sold her the entire bag of tricks. What do you think I'm going to buy?" "What?" "A motor car, old man." In those days the person who bought a motor car was deemed a fearless adventurer of romantic tendencies, and Sullivan so deemed himself. The very word motor car then had a strange and thrilling romantic sound with it. "The deuce you are!" I exclaimed. "I am," said he, happy in having impressed me. He took my arm as though we had been intimate for 1,000 years, and led me fearlessly past the swelling menials within the gate to the club smoking-room, and put me into a grandfather's chair of pale heliotrope plush in front of an onyx table, and put himself into another grandfather's chair of heliotrope plush. And in the cushioned quietude of the smoking-room, where light-shod acolytes served gin and angostura as if serving gin and angostura had been a religious rite, Sullivan went through an extraordinary process of unchaining himself. His form seemed to be crossed and recrossed with chains, gold chains. At the end of one gold chain was a gold cigarette case, from which he produced gold-tipped cigarettes. At the end of another was a gold matchbox. At the end of another, which he may or may not have drawn out by mistake, were all sorts of things, knives, keys, mirrors, and pencils. A singular ceremony. But I was now in the world of gold. And then smoke ascended from the gold-tipped cigarettes as incense from censers, and Sullivan lifted his tinted glass of gin and angostura, and I, perceiving that such actions were expected of one in a theatrical club, responsively lifted mine, and the glasses collided, and Sullivan said, "Here's to the end of the great family quarrel." "I'm with you," said I, and we sipped. My father had quarrelled with his mother in an epoch when even musical comedies were unknown, and the quarrel had spread, as family quarrels do, like a fire or the measles. The punching of my head by Sullivan in the extinct past had been one of its earliest consequences. "May the earth lie lightly on them," said Sullivan. He was referring to the originators of the altercation. The tone in which he uttered this wish pleased me. It was so gentle. It hinted that there was more in Sullivan than met the eye, though a great deal met the eye. I liked him. He awed me, and he also seemed to me somewhat ridiculous in his excessive pomp. But I liked him. The next instant we were talking about Sullivan Smith. How he contrived to switch the conversation suddenly into that channel I cannot imagine. Some people have a gift of conjuring with the conversations. They are almost always frankly and openly interested in themselves, as Sullivan was interested in himself. You may seek to foil them, you may even violently wrench the conversation into other directions, but every effort will be useless. They will beat you. You'd much better lean back in your chair and enjoy their legerdemain. In about 2 minutes Sullivan was in the very midst of his career. "I never went in for high art, you know, all rot. I found I could write melodies that people liked and remembered." He was so used to reading interviews with himself in popular weeklies that he caught the formalistic phraseology, and he was ready apparently to mistake even his cousin for an interviewer. But I liked him, and I could get rather classy effects out of an orchestra, so I kept on. I didn't try to be Wagner. I just stuck to Sullivan Smith. And, my boy, let me tell you, it's only 5 years since The Japanese Cat was produced, and I'm only 27, my boy. And now who is there that doesn't know me?" He put his elbows on the onyx. "Privately, between cousins, you know, I made 7,000 quid last year, and spent half of that. I live on half my income, always have done, always shall. Good principle. I'm a man of business, I am, Carl Foster. Give the public what they want, and save half your income. That's the ticket. Look at me. I've got to act the Duke. It pays, so I do it. I am a Duke. I get 2pence apiece royalty on my photographs. That's what you'll never reach up to, not if you're the biggest doctor in the world." He laughed. "By the way, how's Jem getting along? Still practising at Totnes?" "Yes," I said. "Doing well?" "Oh, so-so. You see, we haven't got 7,000 a year, but we've got 500 each, and Jem's more interested in hunting than in doctoring. He wants me to go into partnership with him, but I don't see myself." "Ambitious, eh, like I was? Got your degree in Edinburgh?" I nodded, but modestly disclaimed being ambitious like he was. "And your sister, Lillian?" "She's keeping house for Jem." "Pretty girl, isn't she?" "Yes," I said doubtfully. "Sings well, too." "So you cultivate music down there?" "Rather," I said. "That is, Lillian does, and I do when I'm with her. We're pretty mad on it. I was dead set on hearing Rosetta Rosa in Lohengrin tonight, but there isn't a seat to be had. I suppose I shall push myself into the gallery." "No, you won't," Sullivan put in sharply. "I've got a box. There'll be a chair for you. You'll see my wife. I should never have dreamt of going. Wagner bores me, though I must say I've got a few tips from him. But when we heard what a rush there was for seats, Emmeline thought we ought to go, and I never cross her if I can help it. I made Smart give us a box. I should be delighted to come, I said. There's only one Smart, I suppose you mean, Sir Cyril? The same, my boy. Lessee of the Opera, lessee of the Diana, lessee of the Folly, lessee of the Ottoman. If anyone knows the colour of his cheques, I reckon it's me. He made me, that I will say. But I made him too. Queer fellow. Awfully cute of him to get elected to the county council. It was through him I met my wife. Did you ever see Emily when she was Sissy Vox? I'm afraid I didn't. You missed a treat, old man. There was no one to touch her in boys' parts in burlesque. Dash fine woman she is. Though I say, dash fine. He seemed to reflect a moment. She's a spiritualist. I wish she wasn't. Spiritualism gets on her nerves. I've no use for it myself, but it's her life. It gives her fancies. She's got some sort of silly notion, don't tell her I said this, Carly, about Rosetta Rosa. Says she's unlucky. Rosa, I mean. Wanted me to warn Smart against engaging her. Me? Imagine it. Why, Rosa will be the making of this opera season. She's getting a terrific salary, Smart told me. It's awfully decent of you to offer me a seat. I began to thank him. Ah, stuff, he said. Cost me nothing. A clock struck softly. Christopher, it's 12:30, and I'm due at the Diana at 12. We're rehearsing, you know. We went out of the club, arm in arm, Sullivan toying with his eyeglass. Well, you'll toddle round tonight, eh? Just ask for my box. You'll find they'll look after you. So long. He walked off. I say, he cried, returning hastily on his steps and lowering his voice. When you meet my wife, don't say anything about her theatrical career. She don't like it. She's a great lady now. See? Why, of course, I agreed. He slapped me on the back and departed. It is easy to laugh at Sullivan. I could see that even then, perhaps more clearly then than now. But I insist that he was lovable. He had little directly to do with my immense adventure, but without him it could not have happened. And so I place him in the forefront of the narrative. End of Chapter 1.
Chapter 1 of The Thing from the Lake. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Roger Moline. The Thing from the Lake by Eleanor M. Ingram. Chapter 1. As well give up the Bible at once as our belief in apparitions. Wesley. The house cried out to me for help. In the after-knowledge I now possess of what was to happen there, that impression is not more clearly definite than it was at my first sight of the place. Let me at once set down that this is not the story of a haunted house. It is, or was, a beleaguered house, strangely besieged as was Prague in the old legend, when a midnight army of specters unfurled pale banners and encamped around the city walls. Of course, I did not know all this, the day that my real estate agent brought me his little car to a stop before the dilapidated farm. I believed the house only appealed to be lived in, for deliverance from the destroying work of neglect and time. A spring rain was whispering down from a gray sky, dripping from broken gutters and eaves with a patter like timid footsteps hurrying by, yet even in the storm the house did not look dreary. "There, Mr. Locke, is a bargain," the agent called back to me, where I sat in my car. "Finest bid in Connecticut for a city man's summer home. Woodland, farmland, lake, and a house that only needs a few repairs to be up to date. Look at that double row of maples, sir. Shade all summer. Fine old orchard, too, with a trifle of attention." I nodded, surveying the house with an eagerness of interest that surprised myself. A box-like, fairly large structure of commonplace New England ugliness, it coaxed my liking as had no other place I had ever seen. It wooed me like a determined woman. And as one would long to clothe beautifully a beloved woman, I looked at the house and foresaw what an architect could do for it, how creamy stucco, broad white porches, and a gay scarlet roof would transform it. "Come inside," my agent urged, hope in his voice as he observed my face. "Let me show you the interior. I brought the keys along. Of course the rooms may seem a bit musty. No one has lived in it for some time. It's the old Mitchell property, been in the family for a couple of 100 years. Last Mitchell is dead now, and it's being sold for the benefit of some religious institute the old gentleman left it to. Trifle wet to walk over the land today. But I've a plan and measurements in my portfolio." I said that we would go in. If he had but known the fact, the place was already sold to me, before I left my car, before I entered the house, before I had seen the 100-odd acres that make up the estate. There was a narrow, flagged path to the veranda, where the planking moved and creaked under our weight, while my companion unlocked the front door. Rather astonishingly, the air of the long-closed place was neither musty nor damp, when we stepped in. Instead, there was a faint, resinous odor, very pleasant and clean, perhaps from the cedar of which the woodwork largely consisted. The house was partially furnished. Not, of course, with much what I would care to retain, but a few good antiques stood out among their commonplace associates. A large bedroom on the north side, which I appointed as my own at first sight, held an old rosewood set including a four-posted, pineapple-carved bed. I threw open the shutters in this room and looked out. I received the first jar to my satisfaction. On this side of the place, the grounds ran down a slight slope for perhaps half a block to the 5-acre hollow of shallow water and lush growth which the agent called a lake. From it flowed a considerable creek, winding behind the house and away on its journey to the Sound. For that underwater marsh I felt a shock of violent dislike. "You don't care for the lake?" my companion deprecated, at my elbow. "Fine trout in that stream, though. I'd like you to see it in the sunshine." "I should care more for it if it was a lake, not a swamp," I answered. "Oh, but that is only because the old dam is down," he exclaimed eagerly. "That lets all the water out, you see. Why, if the dam were put back, you'd have as pretty a lake for a canoe as there is in the state. Its natural depth is 4 or 5 feet all over, and about 8 or 10 where the stream flows through to the dam. Even yet, a few wild duck stop there spring and fall, and when I was a boy I've seen heron. Put back the dam, Mr. Locke, and I'll guarantee you'll never say swamp again." "We will try it," I said. "Now let us find a lawyer and see how quickly I can be put in possession." We drove back to the little town from which we had that morning started out, and where my agent lived, my sleek car following his small one with somewhat the effect of a long-limbed panther striding behind an agitated mouse. It appeared that the sale was simply consummated. I do not mean that all the formalities were completed in a day, but by nightfall I could feel myself the owner of the place. Perhaps it was the giddiness of being a landowner for the first time, or perhaps it was the abject wretchedness of the only hotel in town that inspired the whim which seized me during my solitary dinner. I had spent one night here, and did not welcome the prospect of a second. A return to New York was not practicable, because I had arranged to meet several contractors and an architect at the farm next morning to discuss the alterations I wanted made. Why not drive out to my new house this evening, and sleep tonight in the rosewood furnished bedroom? The idea gained favor as I contemplated it. I could go over the house tonight and sketch more clearly what I wanted done, while I would be on the ground when my men arrived next morning. There was an allure of camping out about it, too. In the end, I went, of course. It was dark when I stabled my roadster in the barn that was part of my new possessions, where the car seemed to glitter disdain of the hay-littered, ragged shelter. Equipped with a flashlight, suitcase, and bundle, I followed a faint path that wound its way to the house through wet blackberry vines whose thorns had outlived the winter. My steps broke the blank silence that brooded over the place. At this season there was no insect life, nor any other stirring thing within hearing or sight. But just as I stepped upon the veranda, I heard a vague sound from the lake that lay a few 100 feet to the north. There was no wind, yet the water had seemed to move with a sound like the smacking of soft, glutinous lips. Or as if some soft body drew itself from a bed of clinging mud. I wondered idly if the tide could run this far back from Long Island Sound. The house reiterated the impression of welcoming me. I shut and locked the old door behind me, and went up to the room I had chosen as my own. There I unshuttered and opened the windows, lighted one of the candles I had brought and set it on a little bookcase filled with dingy volumes, and threw my blankets on the bed. I had moved in. My pleasant sense of proprietorship continued to grow. Before I thought of sleep, I had been through the house several times from cellar to attic and accumulated a list of things to be done. Back in my room, an hour passed in revising the list by candlelight. Near 10 o'clock, I rolled myself in a dressing gown and my blankets, spread an automobile robe over the four-posted bed, and fell asleep. End of chapter 1. Recording by Roger Moline.
Chapter 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda McDaniel. The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. Volume 1, Chapter 2. I could a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul. Shakespeare. Madame St. Aubert was interred in the neighbouring village church. Her husband and daughter attended her to the grave, followed by a long train of the peasantry, who were sincere mourners of this excellent woman. On her return from the funeral, St. Aubert shut himself in his chamber. When he came forth, it was with a serene countenance, though pale in sorrow. He gave orders that his family should attend him. Emily only was absent, who, overcome with the scene she had just witnessed, had retired to her closet to weep alone. St. Aubert followed her thither. He took her hand in silence, while she continued to weep, and it was some moments before he could so far command his voice as to speak. It trembled while he said, "My Emily, I am going to prayers with my family. You will join us. We must ask support from above. Where else ought we to seek it? Where else can we find it?" Emily checked her tears, and followed her father to the parlour, where, the servants being assembled, St. Aubert read, in a low and solemn voice, the evening service, and added a prayer for the soul of the departed. During this, his voice often faltered, his tears fell upon the book, and at length he paused. But the sublime emotions of pure devotion gradually elevated his views above this world, and finally brought comfort to his heart. When the service was ended, and the servants were withdrawn, he tenderly kissed Emily, and said, "I have endeavoured to teach you, from your earliest youth, the duty of self-command. I have pointed out to you the great importance of it through life, not only as it preserves us in the various and dangerous temptations that call us from rectitude and virtue, but as it limits the indulgences which are termed virtuous, yet which, extended beyond a certain boundary, are vicious, for their consequence is evil. All excess is vicious. Even that sorrow, which is amiable in its origin, becomes a selfish and unjust passion, if indulged at the expense of our duties. By our duties I mean what we owe to ourselves as well as to others. The indulgence of excessive grief enervates the mind, and almost incapacitates it for again partaking of those various innocent enjoyments which a benevolent God designed to be the sunshine of our lives. My dear Emily, recollect and practise the precepts I have so often given you, and which your own experience has so often shown you to be wise. Your sorrow is useless. Do not receive this as merely a commonplace remark, but let reason therefore restrain sorrow. I would not annihilate your feelings, my child. I would only teach you to command them, for whatever may be the evils resulting from too susceptible a heart, nothing can be hoped from an insensible one. That, on the other hand, is all vice, vice of which the deformity is not softened, or the effect consoled for, by any semblance or possibility of good. You know my sufferings, and are therefore convinced that mine are not the light words which on these occasions are so often repeated, to destroy even the sources of honest emotion, of which merely display the selfish ostentation of a false philosophy. I will show you, my Emily, that I can practise what I advise. I have said thus much, because I cannot bear to see you wasting in useless sorrow, for want of that resistance which is due from mind; and I have not said it till now, because there is a period when all reasoning must yield to nature. That is past; and another, when excessive indulgence, having sunk into habit, weighs down the elasticity of the spirits so as to render conquest nearly impossible. This is to come. You, my Emily, will show that you are willing to avoid it." Emily smiled through her tears upon her father. "Dear sir," said she, and her voice trembled. She would have added, "I will show myself worthy of being your daughter," but a mingled emotion of gratitude, affection, and grief overcame her. St. Aubert suffered her to weep without interruption, and then began to talk on common topics. The first person who came to condole with St. Aubert was Monsieur Barreau, an austere and seemingly unfeeling man. A taste for botany had introduced them to each other, for they had frequently met in their wanderings among the mountains. Monsieur Barreau had retired from the world, and almost from society, to live in a pleasant château on the skirts of the woods near La Vallée. He also had been disappointed in his opinion of mankind, but he did not, like St. Aubert, pity and mourn for them. He felt more indignation at their vices than compassion for their weaknesses. St. Aubert was somewhat surprised to see him, for though he had often pressed him to come to the château, he had never till now accepted the invitation. And now he came without ceremony or reserve, entering the parlour as an old friend. The claims of misfortune appeared to have softened down all the ruggedness and prejudices of his heart. St. Aubert, unhappy, seemed to be the sole idea that occupied his mind. It was in manners more than in words that he appeared to sympathize with his friends. He spoke little on the subject of their grief, but the minute attention he gave them, and the modulated voice and softened look that accompanied it, came from his heart and spoke to theirs. At this melancholy period, St. Aubert was likewise visited by Madame Cheron, his only surviving sister, who had been some years a widow, and now resided in her own estate near Thoulouse. The intercourse between them had not been very frequent. In her condolements words were not wanting. She understood not the magic of the look that speaks at once to the soul, or the voice that sings like balm to the heart, but she assured St. Aubert that she sincerely sympathized with him, praised the virtues of his late wife, and then offered what she considered to be consolation. Emily wept unceasingly while she spoke. St. Aubert was tranquil, listened to what she said in silence, and then turned the discourse upon another subject. At parting, she pressed him and her niece to make an early visit. "Change of place will amuse you," said she, "and it is wrong to give way to grief." St. Aubert acknowledged the truth of these words, of course, but at the same time felt more reluctant than ever to quit the spot which his past happiness had consecrated. The presence of his wife had sanctified every surrounding scene, and each day, as it gradually softened the acuteness of his suffering, assisted the tender enchantment that bound him to home. But there were calls which must be complied with, and of this kind was the visit he paid to his brother-in-law, Monsieur Quesnel. An affair of an interesting nature made it necessary that he should delay this visit no longer, and wishing to rouse Emily from her dejection, he took her with him to Epourville. As the carriage entered upon the forest that adjoined his paternal domain, his eyes once more caught, between the chestnut avenue, the turreted corners of the château. He sighed to think of what had passed since he was last there, and that it was now the property of a man who neither revered nor valued it. At length he entered the avenue, whose lofty trees had so often delighted him when a boy, and whose melancholy shade was now so congenial with the tone of his spirits. Every feature of the edifice, distinguished by an air of heavy grandeur, appeared successively between the branches of the trees: the broad turret, the arched gateway that led to the courts, the drawbridge, and the dry fosse which surrounded the whole. The sound of carriage wheels brought a troop of servants to the great gate, where St. Aubert alighted, and from which he led Emily into the Gothic hall, now no longer hung with the arms and ancient banners of the family. These were displaced, and the oak wainscoting and beams that crossed the roof were painted white. The large table, too, that used to stretch along the upper end of the hall, where the master of the mansion loved to display his hospitality, and whence the peal of laughter and the song of conviviality had so often resounded, was now removed. Even the benches that had surrounded the hall were no longer there. The heavy walls were hung with frivolous ornaments, and everything that appeared denoted the false taste and corrupted sentiments of the present owner. St. Aubert followed a gay Parisian servant to a parlour, where sat Monsieur and Madame Quesnel, who received him with a stately politeness, and after a few formal words of condolement, seemed to have forgotten that they ever had a sister. Emily felt tears swell into her eyes, and then resentment checked them. St. Aubert, calm and deliberate, preserved his dignity without assuming importance, and Quesnel was depressed by his presence without exactly knowing wherefore. After some general conversation, St. Aubert requested to speak with him alone, and Emily, being left with Madame Quesnel, soon learned that a large party was invited to dine at the château, and was compelled to hear that nothing which was past and irremediable ought to prevent the festivity of the present hour. St. Aubert, when he was told that company were expected, felt a mixed emotion of disgust and indignation against the insensibility of Quesnel, which prompted him to return home immediately. But he was informed that Madame Cheron had been asked to meet him, and when he looked at Emily, and considered that a time might come when the enmity of her uncle would be prejudicial to her, he determined not to incur it himself by conduct which would be resented as indecorous by the very persons who now showed so little sense of decorum. Among the visitors assembled at dinner were two Italian gentlemen, of whom one was named Montoni, a distant relation of Madame Quesnel, a man about 40, of an uncommonly handsome person, with features manly and expressive, but whose countenance exhibited, upon the whole, more of the haughtiness of command, and the quickness of discernment, than of any other character. Signor Cavigni, his friend, appeared to be about 30, inferior in dignity, but equal to him in penetration of countenance, and superior in insinuation of manner. Emily was shocked by the salutation with which Madame Cheron met her father. "Dear brother," said she, "I am concerned to see you look so very ill. Do, pray, have advice." St. Aubert answered, with a melancholy smile, that he felt himself much as usual. But Emily's fears made her now fancy that her father looked worse than he really did. Emily would have been amused by the new characters she saw, and the varied conversation that passed during dinner, which was served in a style of splendour she had seldom seen before, had her spirits been less oppressed. Of the guests, Signor Montoni was lately come from Italy, and he spoke of the commotions which at that period agitated the country, talked of party differences with warmth, and then lamented the probable consequences of the tumults. His friend spoke with equal ardour of the politics of his country, praised the government and prosperity of Venice, and boasted of its decided superiority over all the other Italian states. He then turned to the ladies, and talked with the same eloquence of Parisian fashions, the French opera, and French manners, and on the latter subject he did not fail to mingle what is so particularly agreeable to French taste. The flattery was not detected by those to whom it was addressed, though its effect, in producing submissive attention, did not escape his observation. When he would disengage himself from the assiduities of the other ladies, he sometimes addressed Emily, but she knew nothing of Parisian fashions, or Parisian operas, and her modesty, simplicity, and correct manners formed a decided contrast to those of her female companions. After dinner, St. Aubert stole from the room to view once more the old chestnut which Quesnel talked of cutting down. As he stood under its shade, and looked up among its branches, still luxuriant, and saw here and there the blue sky trembling between them, the pursuits and events of his early days crowded fast to his mind, with the figures and characters of friends long since gone from the earth, and he now felt himself to be almost an insulated being, with nobody but his Emily for his heart to turn to. He stood lost amid the scenes of years which fancy called up, till the succession closed with the picture of his dying wife, and he started away to forget, if possible, at the social board. St. Aubert ordered his carriage at an early hour, and Emily observed that he was more than usually silent and dejected on the way home; but she considered this to be the effect of his visit to a place which spoke so eloquently of former times, nor suspected that he had a cause for grief which he concealed from her. On entering the château, she felt more depressed than ever, for she more than ever missed the presence of that dear parent, who, whenever she had been from home, used to welcome her return with smiles and fondness. Now all was silent and forsaken. But what reason and effort may fail to do, time effects. Week after week passed away, and each as it passed stole something from the harshness of her affliction, till it was mellowed to that tenderness which the feeling heart cherishes as sacred. St. Aubert, on the contrary, visibly declined in health, though Emily, who had been so constantly with him, was almost the last person who observed it. His constitution had never recovered from the late attack of the fever, and the succeeding shock it received from Madame St. Aubert's death had produced its present infirmity. His physician now ordered him to travel, for it was perceptible that sorrow had seized upon his nerves, weakened as they had been by the preceding illness, and variety of scene, it was probable, would, by amusing his mind, restore them to their proper tone. For some days Emily was occupied in preparations to attend him, and he, by endeavours to diminish his expenses at home during the journey, a purpose which determined him at length to dismiss his domestics. Emily seldom opposed her father's wishes by questions or remonstrances, or she would now have asked why he did not take a servant, and have represented that his infirm health made one almost necessary. But when, on the eve of their departure, she found that he had dismissed Jacques, Francis, and Mary, and detained only Theresa, the old housekeeper, she was extremely surprised, and ventured to ask his reason for having done so. "To save expenses, my dear," he replied. "We are going on an expensive excursion." The physician had prescribed the air of Languedoc and Provence, and St. Aubert determined, therefore, to travel leisurely along the shores of the Mediterranean towards Provence. They retired early to their bedchamber on the night before their departure, but Emily had a few books and other things to collect, and the clock had struck 12 before she had finished, or had remembered that some of her drawing instruments, which she meant to take with her, were in the parlour below. As she went to fetch these, she passed her father's room, and perceiving the door half open, concluded that he was in his study; for since the death of Madame St. Aubert, it had been frequently his custom to rise from his restless bed, and go thither to compose his mind. When she was below stairs, she looked into this room, but without finding him, and as she returned to her chamber, she tapped at his door, and receiving no answer, stepped softly in to be certain whether he was there. The room was dark, but a light glimmered through some panes of glass that were placed in the upper part of a closet door. Emily believed her father to be in the closet, and, surprised that he was up at so late an hour, apprehended he was unwell, and was going to inquire; but considering that her sudden appearance at this hour might alarm him, she removed her light to the staircase, and then stepped softly to the closet. On looking through the panes of glass, she saw him seated at a small table, with papers before him, some of which he was reading with deep attention and interest, during which he often wept and sobbed aloud. Emily, who had come to the door to learn whether her father was ill, was now detained there by a mixture of curiosity and tenderness. She could not witness his sorrow, without being anxious to know the subject of, and she therefore continued to observe him in silence, concluding that those papers were letters of her dear mother. Presently he knelt down, and with a look so solemn as she had seldom seen him assume, and which was mingled with a certain wild expression that partook more of horror than of any other character, he prayed silently for a considerable time. When he rose, a ghastly paleness was on his countenance. Emily was hastily retiring, but she saw him turn again to the papers, and she stopped. He took from among them a small case, and from thence a miniature picture. The rays of light fell strongly upon it, and she perceived it to be that of a lady, but not of her mother. St. Aubert gazed earnestly and tenderly upon his portrait, put it to his lips and then to his heart, and sighed with a convulsive force. Emily could scarcely believe what she saw to be real. She never knew till now that he had a picture of any other lady than her mother, much less that he had one which he evidently valued so highly; but having looked repeatedly to be certain that it was not the resemblance of Madame St. Aubert, she became entirely convinced that it was designed for that of some other person. At length St. Aubert returned the picture to its case, and Emily, recollecting that she was intruding upon his private sorrows, softly withdrew from the chamber. Volume 1, Chapter 2. Recording by Linda McDaniel, Atlanta, Georgia, March 2009.
Algernon Blackwood, An Appreciation, by Grace Isabel Colbron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. In these days, when popularity for an author means that his books are read some, but are talked about a great deal more, and that he himself is talked about more than his books, it comes with a shock of pleasing surprise to discover a writer who is read more than he is discussed. This has been Algernon Blackwood's fate thus far. The majority of his books have gone into several editions in England and in this country, and yet they are little talked about, and the man himself even less. He has escaped requests for his opinion on all the multifarious subjects, from esoteric Buddhism to the width of women's skirts, which our popular authors are expected to elucidate in the daily and weekly journals, a deadly result of wide advertising. Algernon Blackwood has been little advertised, except by readers who have come under the spell of his unique literary personality. It is scarcely 10 years since the first book over the name of Algernon Blackwood appeared in England, and already there are 12 volumes of remarkable stories bearing his name. Stories that haunt one after reading, tales that are heady as new wine. His imagination and insight are as rare as his choice of subjects is unusual. But there is no pose about this choice. We feel the man could not express himself in any other way. His rather unique life experience, if one may judge from the few biographical facts he is willing to give, has kept him singularly free from the trammels of the obvious. From a childhood and youth spent in a Moravian school in the Black Forest, he went to the Canadian wilds, and to the life of the man who has only his own exertions upon which to depend. This in spite of titled ancestry which would seem to chain him to conventional habits. Every sort of work came his way, even newspaper work in New York, until he returned to Europe, and began to express in literary form some of the rich experiences that had piled in upon a brain of rare sensitiveness, having apparently entirely escaped the usual sort of life that should have fallen to his lot. There was little to interpose between the eyes of his mind and the core of things. The physical eye became the immediate receiver of impressions that registered themselves on a brain which did not have to forget prejudices and the superimposed opinions of others. The result is one of the most remarkable literary personalities of the present day, a personality too powerful to be imbibed in large doses, even by the most hardened reader. To criticize this personality calmly, by the canons of accredited literary criticism, is a task that taxes self-control. One's pen limps lamely after his 10-league strides, and in a moment of exhaustion one acknowledges that to do Algernon Blackwood justice, one should be Algernon Blackwood himself. At first it seems that it is a subject which enthralls, then comes appreciation of rare insight, and finally a realization of remarkable stylistic power, rich and exuberant, a rush of words like a mountain torrent, suiting sound to sense poignantly, hypnotizing, like some Eastern drug. The reader's progress to understanding follows the writer's progress of achievement. In his earlier books, the subject sometimes taxes his power of expression, but with growing practice, the gift of interpretation in words grows and grows, until his tendency to linger over the soul conflict and hurry with a sentence past actual happenings is handled with such mastery that it gives the chosen theme its greatest charm. There are few others who dare to do this. No one else comes to mind just now who ventures it in such degree, unless it be that wonderful Danish prose stylist J.P. Jacobsen, who dislikes actualities and lingers lovingly over realities as Blackwood does. Algernon Blackwood's chosen theme is the unknown, the great realm that lies beyond the world of the known and the obvious. He finds it in many places, in the forest depths of pathless Canadian wilds, in Egyptian desert sands, in smiling mountain valleys, and even in London streets and offices. It comes to the adult with a tinge of horror, because the adult dislikes and fears all that will not fall in line with his notions of what the world should be like. It comes to the child as something exquisitely sweet, in dreams of stardust caverns, of beautiful, beneficent beings that understand one's play. And it comes to the cat. But then the cat is half in that world always, and often has to come back from it when we would call her attention to our humble human selves. For Algernon Blackwood is one of those rare adults who can so sink his own consciousness of self that he can find his way into the psychology of the little child and the cat. They have taken him into the secret garden, where they really live, and he has interpreted it for us in tales of poignant sweetness. The child and the cat are the supreme nonconformists of a world which spends its energies trying to conform to some set pattern changing with the decades. They simply don't try. That's why so few adults understand them. In A Prisoner in Fairyland, Jimbo, some of the stories in Pan's Garden, New York, the Macmillan Company, and The Education of Uncle Paul, New York, Henry Holt and Company, Blackwood has given us lyrics of childhood that will last. Children themselves may not understand them until they grow up, and then only if they are the sort of children that never grow up. But the adult who knows will find great store of riches, and the lover of cats will find much delight in these books. But when the adult mind finds itself approaching or crossing the borderland that parts the known from the unknown, sorrow or horror even take the place of joy. And in the expression of this creeping horror that chills the heart when the human comes face to face with what is not human, Algernon Blackwood excels. It is not done sensationally. It seems to come from the man's inmost heart as an expression of personal beliefs and experiences. And his stories have little dealing with organized or accredited spiritualism. He has only scorn for such futile mental debauches. He has no interest in ghosts that are ticketed and classified, and have even become fashionable. He lays no claim to scientific research, but he can enthrall the reader until the sweep of unseen or dimly glimpsed presences crowd thick upon us in the silent room, and we long to get back in sheer shrinking fear into the sweet, wholesome business of today. Every degree of emotion felt by the mind and heart under stress of such experience figures in the many stories that deal with this subject. For sheer, naked, concentrated horror, unexplained and unexplainable, such tales as The Wendigo, Lost Valley, New York, Vaughan and Gom, and The Willows, The Listener, New York, Vaughan and Gom, may be said to lead among the stories of the supernatural, but many others are a gorgeous, haunting riot of imagination and creepiness, mingling terror and a sense of splendid free life. Real and unreal in bewildering confusion. The regeneration of Lord Ernie and the stupendous descent into Egypt in the book Incredible Adventures, New York, the Macmillan Company, ancient sorceries, secret worship, and the Camp of the Dog in John Silence, New York, Vaughan and Gom, are some of the most noteworthy among these, although many others have power to hold and thrill unendurably. The Centaur, Macmillan Company, has sustained power of imaginative writing equal to the best Blackwood has produced. Arnold Böcklin, the Swiss painter, had such an imagination, and many a sentence in the best of the Blackwood stories takes the form of a Böcklin picture to the inner vision. One wishes Böcklin were still among us to illustrate these conceptions of a kindred spirit that can see the teeming life just beyond the border of what human vision, hampered by human prejudices, considers fitting limit for the soul's sight. And yet through all these tales of the power of what lies beyond to act upon human lives, there is a note of splendid courage in the appeal to the mind of man to understand that he may control, by controlling himself, all these powers, and take their strength into himself to form it over for good. It is this note, and the sincerity of the style which free the tales entirely from any reproach of desired sensationalism, and which also relieve the strain of horror that might otherwise prove too strong to be wholesome. Algernon Blackwood stands in a class by himself. What effect it will have on his work, if he should ever become popular and Sundays supplemented, cannot now be foretold. But somehow there is that about his writing which arouses the hope that the good in it may survive even such a fate. End of Algernon Blackwood, An Appreciation, by Grace Isabel Colbron.
Section 2 of Black Magic by Marjorie Bowen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1, Chapter 2, The Students. Dead, repeated Balthasar. He pushed back his chair and then laughed. Why, so is my difficulty solved. I am free of that, Thierry. His companion frowned. Do you take it so? I think it is pitiful. The fool was so young. He turned to Dirk. Of what did she die? The sculptor sighed, as if weary of the subject. I know not. She was happy here, yet she died. Balthasar rose. Why did you bury her within the house? He asked, half uneasily. It was in time of war, answered Dirk. We did what we could, and she, I think, had wished it. The knight turned with a little start and crossed himself. God grant that she sleep in peace, he cried. Amen, said Thierry gravely. Dirk took a lantern from the wall and lit it from the coals still burning on the hearth. Now you know all I know of this matter, he remarked. I thought that some day you might come. I have kept for you her ring, your ring. Balthasar interrupted. I want none of it, he said hastily. Dirk lifted the lantern. Its fluttering flame flushed the twilight with gold. Will you please to sleep here tonight? He asked. The knight, with his back to the window, assented, in defiance of a secret dislike to the place. Follow me, commanded Dirk. Then, to the other, I shall be back anon. Good rest, nodded Balthasar. Tomorrow we will get horses in the town and start for Cologne. The knight went after his host through the silent rooms, up a twisting staircase, into a low chamber looking on to the quadrangle. It contained a wooden bedstead, covered with a scarlet quilt, a table, and some richly carved chairs. Dirk lit the candles standing on the table, bade his guest a curt good night, and returned to the workroom. He opened the door of this softly and looked in before he entered. By the window stood Thierry, striving to catch the last light on the pages of a little book he held. Dirk pushed the door wide and stepped in softly. You love reading, he said, and his eyes shone. Eh, and you? Thierry asked tentatively. Master Lucas left me his manuscripts among his other goods, Dirk answered. Being much alone, I have read them. In the lantern light that the air breathed from the garden fanned into a flickering glow, the two young men looked at each other. An extraordinary expression, like a guilty excitement, came into the eyes of each. Being much alone, whispered Thierry, with a dead maid in the house, how have you spent your time? Dirk crouched away against the wall. His hair hung lankly over his pallid face. You pitied her. You would have come, questioned Dirk, when she sent to you. I should have seen no other thing to do, answered Thierry. What manner of a maid was she? I did think her fair, said Dirk slowly. She had yellow hair. You may see her likeness in that picture on the wall, but now it is too dark. Thierry came round the table. You also follow knowledge? He inquired eagerly. Dirk caught up the lantern. You are not aware of the nature of my studies, he cried, and his eyes shone wrathfully. Come to bed. I am weary of talking. Thierry bent his head. This is a fair place for silences, he said. As if gloomily angry, yet disdaining the expression of it, Dirk conducted him to a chamber close to that where Balthasar lay, and left him without speech, nor did Thierry solicit any word of him. Dirk did not return to the workroom, but went into the garden and paced to and fro under the stars that burnt fiercely and seemed to hang very low over the dark line of the house. His walk was hasty, his steps uneven. He bit, with an air of absorbed distraction, his lip, his finger, the ends of his straight hair, and now and then he looked with tumultuous eyes up at the heavens, down at the ground, and wildly about him. It was well into the night when he at last returned into the house, and taking a candle in his hand, went stealthily up to Balthasar's chamber. With a delicate touch he unfastened the door, and very lightly entered. Shielding the candle flame with his hand, he went up to the bed. The young knight lay heavily asleep. His yellow hair was tumbled over his flushed face and about the pillow. His arms hung slackly outside the red coverlet. On the floor were his brilliant clothes, his sword, his belt, his purse. Where his shirt fell open at the throat, a narrow blue cord showed a charm attached. Dirk stood still, leaning forward a little, looking at the sleeper, and expressions of contempt, of startled anger, of confusion, of reflection passed across his haggard features. Balthasar did not stir in his deep sleep. Neither the light held above him nor the intense gaze of the young man's dark eyes served to wake him, and after a while Dirk left him and passed to the chamber opposite. There lay Thierry fully dressed on his low couch. Dirk set the candle on the table and came on tiptoe to his side. The scholar's fair face was resting on his hand, his chin up-tilted, his full lips a little apart. His lashes lay so lightly on his cheek it seemed he must be glancing from under them. His hair, dark, yet shining, was heaped round his temples. Dirk, staring down at him, breathed furiously, and the colour flooded his face, receded, and sprang up again. Then, retreating to the table, he sank on to the rush-bottomed chair and put his hands over his eyes. The candle flame leapt in unison with his uneven breaths. Looking round after a while, with a wild glance, he gave a long, distraught sigh, and Thierry moved in his sleep. At this the watcher sat expectant. Thierry stirred again, turned, and rose on his elbow with a start. Seeing the light and the young man sitting by it, staring at him with brilliant eyes, he set his feet to the ground. Before he could speak, Dirk put his finger on his lips. "Hush," he whispered. "Balthasar is asleep." Thierry, startled, frowned. "What do you want with me?" For answer, the young sculptor moaned and dropped his head into the curve of his arm. "You are strange," said Thierry. Dirk glanced up. "Will you take me with you to Padua, to Bâle?" he said. "I have money and some learning." "You are free to go, as I," answered Thierry, but awakened interest shone in his eyes. "I would go with you," insisted Dirk intensely. "Will you take me?" Thierry rose from the bed uneasily. "I have had no companion all my life," he said. "The man whom I would take into my confidence must be of rare quality." He came to the other side of the table and across the frail gleam of the candle looked at Dirk. Their eyes met and instantly sank, as if each were afraid of what the other might reveal. "I have studied somewhat," said Dirk hoarsely. "You also, I think, in the same science." The silent awe of comprehension fell upon them. Then Thierry spoke. "So few understand. Can it be possible that you—" Dirk rose. "I have done something." Thierry paled, but his hazel eyes were bright as flame. "How much?" Then he broke off. "God help us." "Ah, do you use that name?" cried Dirk, and showed his teeth. The other, with cold fingers, clutched at the back of the rush-bottomed chair. "So it is true. You deal with You. Ah, you! What was that book you were reading? Asked Dirk sharply. There was a pause. Then Dirk crushed the candle out with his open palm and answered on a half sob of excitement. Black magic! Black magic! End of section 2. Recording by Molly Craig.
Chapter 1 of Jewish Children by Shalom Aleichem. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Jewish Children, Jüdische Kinder by Shalom Aleichem, translated by Hannah Berman, and read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 1. A page from the Song of Songs. Bussie is a name. It is the short for Esther Libber, Libassa, Bussie. She is a year older than I, perhaps 2 years, and both of us together are no more than 20 years old. Now, if you please, sit down and think it out for yourself. How old am I, and how old is she? But it is no matter. I will rather give you her history in a few words. My older brother Benny lived in a village. He had a mill. He could shoot with a gun, ride on a horse, and swim like a devil. One summer he was bathing in the river and was drowned. Of him they said the proverb had been invented, "All good swimmers are drowned." He left after him the mill, 2 horses, a young widow, and 1 child. The mill was neglected. The horses were sold. The young widow married again and went away somewhere far, and the child was brought to us. The child was Bussie. That my father loves Bussie as if she were his own child, and that my mother frets over her as if she were an only daughter, is readily understood. They look upon her as their comfort in their great sorrow. And I? Why is it that when I come from Cheder and do not find Bussie, I cannot eat, and when Bussie comes in, there shines a light in every corner? When Bussie talks to me, I drop my eyes, and when she laughs at me, I weep, and when she... I waited long for the dear good feast of Passover. I would be free then. I would play with Bussie in nuts, and run about in the open, go down the hill to the river, and show her the ducks in the water. When I tell her, she does not believe me. She laughs. She never believes me. That is, she says nothing, but she laughs, and I hate to be laughed at. She does not believe that I can climb to the highest tree if I like. She does not believe that I can shoot, if I have anything to shoot with. When the Passover comes, the dear good Passover, and we can go out in the free open air, away from my father and mother, I shall show her such tricks that she will go wild. The dear good Passover has come. They dress us both in kingly clothes. Everything we wear shines and sparkles and glitters. I look at Bussie, and I think of the Song of Songs that I learned for the Passover, verse by verse. Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair, thou hast dove's eyes within thy locks. Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear from Mount Gilead. Thy teeth are like a flock of sheep that are even shorn, which come up from the washing, whereof every one bare twins, and none is barren among them. Thy lips are like a thread of scarlet, and thy speech is comely. Thy temples are like a piece of pomegranate within thy locks. But tell me, please, why is it that one looks at Bussie, one is reminded of the Song of Songs, and when one reads the Song of Songs, Bussie rises to one's mind? A beautiful Passover Eve, bright and warm. "Shall we go?" asks Bussie, and I am all afire. My mother does not spare the nuts. She fills our pockets, but she makes us promise that we will not crack a single one before the Seder. We may play with them as much as we like. We run off. The nuts rattle as we go. It is beautiful and fine out of doors. The sun is already high in the heavens and is looking down on the other side of the town. Everything is broad and comfortable and soft and free around and about. In places, on the hill and the other side of the synagogue, one sees a little blade of grass, fresh and green and living. Screaming and fluttering their wings, there fly past us, over our heads, a swarm of young swallows. and again I am reminded of the Song of Songs I learned at school. The flowers appear on the earth, the time of the singing of birds is come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land. I feel curiously light. I imagine I have wings and can rise up and fly away. A curious noise comes from town, a roaring, a rushing, a tumult. In a moment the face of the world is changed for me. Our farm is a courtyard, our house is a palace. I am a prince, Bussy, a princess. The logs of wood that lie at our door are the cedars and firs of the Song of Songs. The cat that is warming herself in the sun near the door is a roe or a young hart. And the hill on the other side of the synagogue is the mountain of Lebanon. The women and the girls who are washing and scrubbing and making everything clean for the Passover are the daughters of Jerusalem. Everything is from the Song of Songs. I walk about with my hands in my pockets. The nuts shake and rattle. Bussy walks beside me, step by step. I cannot go slowly. I am carried along. I want to fly, to soar through the air like an eagle. I let myself go. Bussy follows me. I jump from one log of wood to the other. Bussy jumps up after me. I am up, she is up. I am down, she is down. Who will tire first? How long is this to last? Asks Bussy. And I answer her in the words of the Song of Songs. Until the day break and the shadows flee away. Bah, 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 you are tired and I am not. I am glad that Bussy does not know what I know, and I am sorry for her. My heart aches for her. I imagine she is sorrowful. That is her nature. She is glad and joyous, and suddenly she sits down in a corner and weeps silently. My mother comforts her, and my father showers kisses on her, but it is useless. Bussy weeps until she is exhausted. For whom? For her father who died so young, or for her mother who married again and went off without a goodbye? Ah, her mother. When one speaks of her mother to her, she turns all colours. She does not believe in her mother, she does not say an unkind word of her, but she does not believe in her. Of that I am sure. I cannot bear to see Bussy weeping. I sit down beside her and try to distract her thoughts from herself. I keep my hands in my pockets, rattle my nuts and say to her, "Guess what I can do if I like." "What can you do?" "If I like, all your nuts will belong to me." "Will you win them off me?" "We shall not even begin to play." "Then will you take them from me?" "No, they will come to me of themselves." She lifts her beautiful blue eyes to me, her beautiful blue Song of Song eyes. I say to her, "You think I am jesting? Little fool, I know certain magic words." She opens her eyes still wider. I feel big. I explain myself to her like a great man, a hero. We boys know everything. There is a boy at school, Shaika, the blind one we call him. He's blind of one eye. He knows everything in the world, even Kabbalah. Do you know what Kabbalah is? No. How am I to know? I am in the seventh heaven because I can give her a lecture on Kabbalah. Kabbalah, little fool, is a thing that is useful. By means of Kabbalah I can make myself invisible to you whilst I can see you. By means of Kabbalah I can draw wine from a stone and gold from a wall. By means of Kabbalah I can manage that we two shall rise up into the clouds and even higher than the clouds. To rise up in the air with Bussy by means of Kabbalah into the clouds and higher than the clouds, and fly with her far, far over the ocean, that was one of my best dreams. There, on the other side of the ocean, live the dwarfs who are descended from the giants of King David's time. the dwarfs who are in reality good-natured folks. They live on sweets and milk of almonds, and play all day on little lutes, and dance all together in a ring, romping about. They are afraid of nothing, and are fond of strangers. When a man comes to them from our world, they give him plenty to eat and drink, dress him in the finest garments, and load him with gold and silver ornaments. Before he leaves, they fill his pockets with diamonds and rubies, which are to be found in their streets like mud in ours." "Like mud in the streets? Well," said Bussy to me when I had told her all about the dwarfs. "Do you not believe it?" "Do you believe it?" "Why not?" "Where did you hear it?" "Where? At school." "Ah, at school." The sun sank lower and lower, tinting the sky with red gold. The gold was reflected in Bussy's eyes. They were bathed in gold. I want very much to surprise Bussy with Shaika's tricks, which I can imitate by means of Kabbalah. But they do not surprise her. On the contrary, I think they amuse her. Why else does she show me her pearl-white teeth? I am a little annoyed, and I say to her, "Maybe you do not believe me." Bussy laughs. "Maybe you think I am boasting, or that I am inventing lies out of my own head." Bussy laughs louder. "Oh, in that case I must show her. I know how." I say to her, "The thing is, you do not know what Kabbalah means. If you knew what Kabbalah was, you would not laugh. By means of Kabbalah, if I like, I can bring your mother here. Yes, yes, and if you beg hard of me, I will bring her this very night, riding on a stick." All at once she stops laughing. A cloud settles on her beautiful face, and I imagine that the sun has disappeared. No more sun, no more day. I'm afraid I went a little too far. I had no right to pain her, to speak of her mother. I'm sorry for the whole thing. I must wipe it out. I must ask her forgiveness. I creep close to her. She turns away from me. I try to take her hand. I wish to say to her in the words of the Song of Songs, "Return, return, O Sulamite Bussy." Suddenly a voice called from the house, "Shimak, Shimak." I am Shimak. My mother is calling me to go to the synagogue with father. To go to the synagogue with one's father on the Passover Eve. Is there in the world a greater pleasure than that? What is it worth to be dressed in new clothes from head to foot and to show off before one's friends? Then the prayers themselves, the first festival evening prayer and blessing. Ah, how many luxuries has the good God prepared for his Jewish children. "Shimak, Shimak." My mother has no time. I'm coming in a minute. I only want to say a word to Bussy, no more than a word." I confess to Bussy that I told her lies. One cannot make people fly by means of Kabbalah. One may fly oneself, and I will show her after the festival how I can fly. I will rise from this same spot on the logs before her eyes, and in a moment reach the other side of the clouds. From there I will turn a little to the right. You see, there all things end, and one comes upon the shore of the frozen ocean. Bussy listens attentively. The sun is sending down its last rays and kissing the earth. "What is the frozen sea?" asks Bussy. "You don't know what the frozen sea is? It is a sea whose waters are thick as liver and salt as brine. No ships can ride on it. When people fall into it, they can never get out again." Bussy looks at me with big eyes. "Why should you go there?" "Am I going, little fool? I fly over it like an eagle. In a few minutes I shall be over the dry land, and at the 12 mountains that spit fire. At the 12th hill, at the very top, I shall come down and walk 7 miles until I come to a thick forest. I shall go in and out of the trees until I come to a little stream. I shall swim across the water and count 7 times 7. A little old man with a long beard appears before me and says to me, What is your request? I answer, bring me the Queen's daughter. What Queen's daughter? Asks Bussy, and I imagine she is frightened. The Queen's daughter is the princess who was snatched away from under the wedding canopy and bewitched, and put into a palace of crystal 7 years ago. What has that to do with you? What do you mean by asking what it has to do with me? I must go and set her free. You must set her free? Who else? You need not fly so far. Take my advice, you need not. Bussy takes hold of my hand, and I feel her little white hand is cold. I look into her eyes, and I see in them the reflection of the red gold sun that is bidding farewell to the day, the first bright warm Passover day. The day dies by degrees. The sun goes out like a candle. The noises of the day are hushed. There is hardly a living soul in the street. In the little windows shine the lights of the festival candles that have just been lit. A curious, a holy stillness wraps us round, Bussy and myself. We feel that our lives are fast merging in the solemn stillness of the festival evening. Shimak! Shimak! My mother calls me for the 3rd time to go with my father to the synagogue. Do I not know myself that I must go to prayers? I will sit here another minute, 1 minute, no more. Bussy hears my mother calling